Exclusive series of panel discussions and interviews featuring the who's who of the global cloud and data center industry. This is your one-stop destination for expert opinions and insights from movers and shakers and everyone that matters in the data center industry. Hello, Namaste Salam. I'm Deborah Gray and I serve as the regional editor, South Asia and Middle East here at W.Media. Now, you have probably heard about W.Media's Cloud and Data Center Conventions. These are premier industry events held across the Asia Pacific and the Middle East, where we bring together the best and brightest minds from the global cloud and data center industry, including top executives, digital infrastructure professionals such as architects, engineers and consultants, key buyers, decision makers, data center owners and operators. Here, these experts give presentations and keynote addresses and also participate in Power Pack panel discussions. Today's episode will give you a taste of one such exclusive panel discussion from W.Media's Hong Kong Cloud and Data Center Convention. In this discussion, our panelists will share their expert outlook on the demand for data centers from 2024 to 2027 in Hong Kong. This promises to be a power-packed show, but before we move forward, a word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Japan Digital Infrastructure Week, where W.Media gives you a chance to explore Japan's thriving data center market and interact with the creme de la creme of data center operators, digital industry experts and veterans, and hear them share their technological insights and wisdom. Japan Digital Infrastructure Week begins June 5. For more details, visit www.digitalinfraweek.com/Japan. All right, then, let's dive into the panel discussion. The panel is moderated by Teresa Ren, Senior Analyst, DC Byte. The speakers in this panel are Rosanna Tang, Executive Director, Head of Research, Head of Business Development Services at Cushman and Wakefield; Damon Lim, Regional Director of Asia Pacific, datacenterHawk; Patrick McCreery, Regional Vice President, Global Client Solutions, Yondr Group; and Georgina Cho, Chief Corporate Development Officer, Hong Kong Cyberport Management Company Limited.
Thanks, everyone. So maybe to first kick off our discussion, I'm going to share some figures first from my team's database to kind of frame up how the Asia-Pacific markets kind of stack up against the global landscape. So based on the DC Byte data, the APAC data center market grew the fastest globally in terms of live supply. So specifically, the Asia-Pacific region saw a 5-year, 19% compound annual growth rate from 2018 onwards. So with that, I'd like to actually pose the first question of the day to our panelists on whether, this kind of aligns with your observations. What are your observations of the APAC data center markets, particularly in the last 2 years as we are in this post-pandemic period? So maybe I could get Patrick to start first this round.
Well, I think that is a very conservative view as well. I would say that the actual take-up and interest in data center capacity is accelerated significantly over the last few years. I mean, COVID really drove a lot of online behavior, a lot of online applications, a lot of hybrid working, people using digital tools to do their work. I think that drove a lot of capacity. I think Andrew's stats were quite interesting that Hong Kong is at 90% utilization of current capacity. I think that's in, the major Tier 1 markets in Asia. I think that's the case. People have been trying to grab as much capacity that's available as possible. And I think as you we'll get into this in the future, you're starting to see a shift in new applications and new investments, and that's going to be driving sort of different use cases going forward. But I think, all of these things will, especially in mature markets, continue to work in, side by side. And the ecosystem of around the data center, connectivity, power, the tools to do cooling, power management, and things like that are only going to increase over the next few years.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rosanna.
Well, actually, we are globally just published a global ranking data center report earlier this month. And in the report, we did also highlight some of the key changes and emerging trends that we observed over the last year or so, and perhaps over the pandemic period. I think from a real estate or capital perspective, we do see, I agree with the trend that you mentioned. Although, of course, the market has been going through some challenging time because of the economic performance, because of the interest rate rise. But having said that, we do see a very resilient capital going through into the data center sector over the last 2 years' time. And I think this is also, of course, backed by the continued demand from the cloud computing and emerging AI application, etc., that Andrew also mentioned in his presentation earlier on. And I think one of the things that we also see is that for some of the primary colocation providers, because some of them had already paired off with the key institutional players, key institutional investor in the market. So these leave some of the, it's a situation of less of products in some of the large-scale opportunities in the mature market. And that's why we also see that nowadays when investors wanted to tap into this sector, perhaps they may seek or focus on some of the emerging markets, perhaps some of the secondary markets or tertiary markets around the region as well.
Thanks, Rosanna. Damon?
Sure. Yep. So, I think I definitely agree with Patrick that some numbers might be a little bit conservative. So, for example, like in North America, we have been tracking that absorption, which is uptake of data center capacity, has pretty much doubled for the last couple of years. So in 2021, it was like 1.1 gigawatts, right, of absorption in the whole of Northern America. And by the end of 2023, that was almost 4 gigawatts. So almost doubling every single year for the last couple of years. And that's driven by a lot of the consumption figures. You know, Baby Shark is probably one of them. And I'm not sure how many of you don't use Microsoft Teams down here. Pretty much. Wow. Okay. Couple, right? So just so you know, from 2019, the number of daily users for Microsoft Teams was actually 20 million globally. And by 2023, it was 300. I don't even know what's the CAGR for that. I'm not a math person, but you can definitely count it's more than 10 times. Right, just in that few couple of years, and that's really driven by the COVID pandemic.
Georgina?
Coming from the incubator point of view, all the data center growth actually driven by applications, right? For example, we have a lot of startups within Cyberport, like they focus on the AI, blockchain, cybersecurity, and also in the application layer and industry, like fintech and smart living, digital entertainment, the Baby Shark. All of those actually drive a lot of the data center workload, and that's why I agree with you guys that the growth is nonstop, and with all the applications on the internet, it will keep driving the data center market.
Thanks, Georgina. Yeah, I think so far, even with the first session by Andrew, I think we've really seen how the different drivers of data center demand have really driven the growth. I think the panelists are definitely right. The earlier figure that I quoted was live supply. If we're talking about the pipeline supply, that's going to be way more. So I think across the APAC region, it's in total, I think we see about 11 gigawatts actually. So I think that number is just bound to grow. Given that, we've talked quite a bit in terms of the key demand drivers so far, in terms of the AI, cloud adoption, I was actually very surprised to learn about the big house example. I'm very excited to go and try it later when I get the chance. But maybe now pivoting to that differentiation between like developing versus developed markets. I actually like to ask the panelists to weigh in on what do you guys see being the unique opportunities and challenges between, these different markets. Maybe using the key prime examples of developed markets like Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, as well as Sydney for the developed markets. Yeah, how do you guys see the upcoming opportunities and challenges in these data center markets? So maybe I'll get Damon to start first for this.
Yep, sure. So I think, when it comes to data centers right now, especially when the amount of investments coming into data centers as a real estate asset class has been increasing, I would say that there's two different strategies that, different operators can look at, right? So from a capital deployment standpoint, obviously, there's going to be a lot of hyperscale developments, as well as, to target towards the AI, where you're looking at more regional workloads deployed to help the entire region from a learning perspective. The learning kind of deployments. But at the same time, we will still see all the different cloud deployments, right? So like just in between the last 2 years or so, there's been 18 new AZs announced in Asia Pacific itself. Yeah, so in terms of the different locations, right? So obviously all this started, if some of you from more the technical side of things, it comes from that distributed deployment that Cisco has started, and now you're seeing moving from the cloud all the way to the AI as well.
Rosanna?
I think if you talk about opportunities, we do see that a trend that has been ongoing for the whole real estate sector would be sustainability, right? This is applicable to basically all commercial sectors and not alone for data center. It's getting especially important for data center sector as well. So I think from a design perspective, we do see that it's getting increasingly important for the new data centers to especially adopt this kind of features, tick the box. You know, we have different kinds of standardization of or ways to count the efficiency, like like things like that. I think it would be a trend going forward. But if you're talking about challenges, as I also mentioned earlier in Andrew's presentation, I think land constraint will be one of the key challenges that we see, especially for most of the mature markets. Like for example, for cases in Hong Kong, actually 44% of the data center spaces currently in the city is actually from a conversion from the previous industrial building or warehouses instead of a new build. So, and that's back to the point because of the land constraint and it becomes a challenging point for some of the operators to seek their land in the city. And also, we also hear from most of our clients or operators saying about the power supply is also a very big issue, and it takes a very long time. It's talking about a couple of years once they start the negotiation until they get the power supply really get to the plant. It takes at least several years to do. So for some of the operators, if they have long-term presence in Hong Kong, maybe they can still wait for the time frame. But for some of the institutional investors or for some of the operation funds, they may eye on a fund life for like 5 to 7 years, then they may not have such a time frame to wait in the market per se.
Thanks for raising this very pertinent point. So I think a lot of supply side challenges that Rosanna has mentioned. Maybe Patrick, can ask you to weigh in on this.
So I'll mention a couple of points that are very much aligned with what the other panelists were mentioning. There's a commercial trade-off that all application developers and companies that are managing data center services and the operators have to make when it related to emerging markets and more mature markets. And it really comes down to the use case and the economics of supporting an application either locally in a city like Hong Kong or whether it can be distributed across the region. I would say that one of the things that we need to keep our eye on, what will be the benefit of the company I work for is we're working very closely with all of the hyperscalers, whether they be Western or we've had a number of in-depth conversations with the Chinese hyperscalers as well. When they're deploying these new chipsets, the GPUs, the higher performance workloads in the data centers, it's going to put much more stress. And this gets into what's the challenge in a developed market like a Hong Kong or a Singapore. A lot of the legacy data centers, the older, very connected data centers, aren't going to be able to support those higher performance workloads. The power densities that we're looking at, just on an anecdotal basis, we're looking at when my company is looking at a number of opportunities where we need to support 40 kilowatt per rack, and that's sort of a minimum. But we're talking to one customer that wants to do 100 plus. So that's not going to be supportable in a very older sort of colo or connectivity driven data center. You're going to have to look at building dedicated infrastructure or an environment where we can provide that cooling and the power support that aligns with that application. So I think that's something that we need to consider, and that gets into the sustainability, the power management, the regulatory environment that supports building data centers in cities like Hong Kong. On the other side, on the developing market side, again, a lot of these new applications, there's an opportunity for those countries to leapfrog using 5G and other technologies to drive digital economic growth. And I think it's important that there be a very strong co-location ecosystem to help companies sort of launch and develop their businesses. And then eventually, once a market gets more mature, then you can have the data center segmentation, naturally happen, like I was just mentioning.
Thanks for that, Patrick. Very insightful discussion of the different developing versus developed markets. Georgina?
I like to speak for the developed market like Hong Kong. As we are building our supercomputing center in Hong Kong soon at Cyberport, we actually quite agree with the panelists about the power density, because we're trying to build a supercomputing center with the capacity about 3,000 petaflops, which is about 375 machines, and it actually consumes about 5 kilowatt of power. And this is the opportunity certainly for the data center operator, because with the GPUs with such a high power density, there's an opportunity for the data center provider to provide those space to support the AI workload or machine learning. But at the same time, the challenge is because in Hong Kong, as we're a limited space, and the data centers in Hong Kong mostly supporting around maybe up to 10 kVA of space per rack, with power per rack. And those GPU on general, what we're seeing is they need at least at a minimum of 12 kVA per rack. So it takes that's the challenges for us. I mean, most data center with our research recently required substantial upgrade in terms of the facility in order to support a high power density. So that's the challenges we will have in Hong Kong.
Thanks for that, Gina. So I think now maybe weighing in on and pivoting to a more focused view on the developed market of Hong Kong. I think our panelists have raised some very important points about the challenges. So maybe just tapping on their unique kind of perspectives, and maybe I can get Georgina and Patrick to weigh in on this. What do you think are some of the collaborative efforts you see that are necessary for stakeholders like the government and operators to work together to ensure, the continued success and resilience of data centers in the region in, such constrained markets like Hong Kong, for example?
I could cover some first, coming from both public and private sector. I imagine there's a lot of communications and partnership and collaborations. I could call you some example, which is perhaps not just related to data center, but other initiatives. Like recently, Hong Kong SL government, where we're developing the North Metropolis, and Cyberport take part of it in part of the developing the digital tech and logistic hub in Lo Fo Shan. And the planning department of the Hong Kong government, they actually invited the leading enterprises and operators to actually hear the plan and ask them to share a view on the industry development and all the talent cultivation. We also invited some other startup to share the view of the future development as a digital hub. And also at the same time, when I mentioned about the supercomputing center, we also actually inquire and get the feedback from a lot of data center operators, the government department, university, on how we could shape up the supercomputing center. So when it applies to the data center industry, it's the same way, we talk to different department within the government to make sure we have the sufficient infrastructure, like power, for example, to ensure that in the future, looking ahead for 5, 10 years, or even 20 years, we're able to support the infrastructure of the operator, which in return be able to support the future workloads like AI and machine learning, for example.
Well, I would sort of speaking to what Georgina was saying, that there's going to be a lot of investment in new businesses that will drive demand for data center usage. And going back to what I was just saying previously, I think Hong Kong can benefit from operators being and developers having a much more clear vision on what their technical requirements are going to be, and working with the local government and regulators to make sure that their designs are very energy efficient. Sustainability is clearly going to be an issue. I think we would like to ask, I think, or we can certainly partner effectively with the government to build more. We're not going to be able to build huge data center campuses in a constrained land market like Hong Kong. So again, urban, more vertical data centers are going to be the norm. And so working with regulators to make sure that we have the ability to develop new data center clusters in the city will be critical, I think, for accelerating and expanding the market going forward. And then hopefully with the Greater Bay Area opening up and the free flow of information cross-border, then you'll have, again, the opportunity to segment which applications sit, within the city limits and outside.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I think moving on that very important point about segmentation of the data center market as it evolves. Maybe now I also get Damon and Rosanna to now weigh in terms of, particularly given that APAC is often considered to be some years behind maybe the development in other regions, sometimes because in terms of, for example, AI deployments, we're seeing a lot more of that happening out in the Americas, and we are definitely set to see that come to APAC sooner rather than later. So given maybe some case studies that you guys might have, how do you guys actually perceive the evolving demand for data center space in developed markets like Hong Kong? Maybe I'll get Rosanna to weigh in first.
In terms of evolving of the demand here, I think for Hong Kong, we started to see the data center market started developing since the dot-com boom in 2000. And then we have been going through a very rapid growing phase over the last decade. But it's interesting to see that for example, in the past, in the data center market, we used to see the end users mainly focusing from industries like banking and finance or perhaps telecom operators. But now we do see that currently the market has expanded a lot. Currently we are having over 20 data center operators in the city already. So and now we do expect we will continue to see the expansion of these operators ongoing in the future, especially we are seeing growing demand coming from the cloud computing services as well as the hyperscaler. And of course, these are all driven by some of the applications that the other panelists has discussed earlier. And from a real estate perspective, currently we are actually having around 11 million square feet of data center space in Hong Kong. Of course, with majority of the proportion is clustering in the Champernot area. But ongoing, I think we will start to see more new clusters forming around, for example, Kwai Chung Tsuen Wan Tsing Yi cluster, which currently also composes around 30% of our stock in Hong Kong now. And I think ongoing going forward, I do agree with Andrew that Hong Kong, we are having a very unique position to bridge between, we are part of the GBA cities, and then we do have a role to play, especially we are having this kind of digital development phase. And we do believe we will have a basically we can bridge between mainland China and the other overseas operator going forward, and we will continue to play our edge in this role ongoing.
Yeah, so on my end, when I was at the operator side of things, there was this sense that, data centers was becoming more and more commoditized, right? And there was a lot of concerns within the industry, in all honesty, that it was going to go the way of the telecommunication side as well. But you will notice that, over time, the kind of demand that's been driven has really just gone tremendously. And that started from the digital transformations, then to the cloud deployments, as well as now with the AI wave that's happening as well. From a Hong Kong perspective, Hong Kong will always stay a financial hub, right? And so with that, we've seen business leaders trying to integrate, AI into their business workflows. I know Andrew mentioned that AI is not new, and that's true, right? With machine learning almost being a extension of AI, it's being used for KYCs, chatbots, etc. And that's just really going to drive the data center demands going forward. Another thing that happened, from a more personal level or consumer level was when ChatGPT went mainstream. Immediately when when it went mainstream, there was a huge wait list to get on it. And that's just people having the kind of demands for that right now. And with AI going on, you can use it to draw pictures, you can use it to translate your voice, right, from the videos. And that even includes the ability to change the way your lips move, right, to the translated language as well. Therefore, I would say that, with the finance sector leading the way, the transactions as well as the use of AI inference will just really go in the daily business. And it is really no coincidence that leading cloud providers in Hong Kong are actually promoting use cases and customer stories related to all of this as well for the financial sector as well as for AI use cases.
Thanks, Damon. So I'm conscious that we've also, the session has gone for a while now. So maybe if I could take the opportunity to summarize some of the key points that our panelists have made so far. So I think so far, data center demand in the APAC region continues to grow, cloud adoption, and more recently, of course, the AI trend, as Damon just mentioned, generative AI, once that it became mainstream at the tail end of 2022, I think there was a lot more interest. And, as these various AI deployments and use cases kind of evolve, it's really up to the data center space, different industry stakeholders to kind of evolve and kind of pivot to see how that they can meet these different data center demands of these end clients. I think in the some points that were also raised in the examples of constrained markets like Hong Kong, whereby like land and power, are really the main challenges at the moment. Not so much of the demand. It's also looking at how the existing facilities or the existing operators can pivot and adapt accordingly. I understand as well from the AI perspective, there's also a differentiation in terms of the machine learning models versus the inferencing models. So it's really, up to the space. And I believe we are all, adapting accordingly. Maybe as with that, I would like to get the panelists to share maybe one key takeaway you'd like the audience members to take away as we end up this round up this session. Georgina, maybe I'll get you to start first.
I just want to make one final comment about what Andrew mentioned earlier about we still have a lot of rooms on digital transformation. And one of the things to drive the transformation and also the data center growth is that you need to have the right talent. I'd like to supplement the fact that the Hong Kong government actually launched various schemes and subsidies to attract and fast track the overseas and mainland talent to Hong Kong for a 2-year stay. So we basically do a lot of initiative to bring in talent to run the data center, to run the AI workload. So this is one of the key initiatives that the Hong Kong government, even Cyberport, will support them as well. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Patrick.
So a number of announcements have been made about data center industry consortiums. I think if you look at Europe, they're sort of leading the sort of our industry with planning sustainability initiatives. And I think it would be good for all of us to participate sort of in an organized way of making data centers more efficient. That will help governments support our growth and then obviously build up the whole ecosystem.
Rosanna?
I think for Hong Kong, I agree very much what Georgina said about talent. And I think another piece that we have to focus is also the Northern Metropolis. I think there is a whole piece of land that can provide the future development opportunities that the market cannot miss over the next decade or so. But I think it's very crucial for the private sector can work collaboratively with the government to develop this piece of land together.
Damon?
Sure. As we're seeing more and more pre-leasing happening, capacity requirements are getting larger and delivery times are generally getting longer as well with, the few suppliers that each data center operator will typically work with, because at the end of the day, data centers still work on a reputation perspective. You do not want to have any downtime, so you still work with all those guys. So that's something that one of the trends that we're definitely seeing. And the second part around that, where the kind of customizations are required, is that buyers want space that's customized strictly for them, and that allows both parties actually work closer together to negotiate rates and contracts that work for all parties and delivery timelines as well. This is something that we should take note of as well.
Thanks, Damon. Yeah, so I think, we've actually touched on quite a number of points, including these last few takeaway bits from our panelists.
And that's a